Welcome. Mark Wilson here at Pebble Hill, the historic Scott-Yarbrough House in Auburn, built in 1847 and home to the Caroline Marshall Draughon Center for the Arts and Humanities in the College of Liberal Arts at Auburn University. Part of our mission includes interpretation of this historic house and the people associated with it. Our presenter today, Shari Williams, and our respondent, Dr. Terrance Vickerstaff, have made unique and important contributions to a better understanding of the little known but quite important early African American legacy. Shari L. Williams is a doctoral candidate in Auburn University's Department of History. Her research interests include the past, present, and future of historic rural landscapes, traditions, and sites in Alabama's Black Belt. She is the founder and executive director of The Ridge, a local interpretive center focused on the history of the federal road through Macon County, multicultural migration, and rural community development. Welcome, Shari.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for that technical difficulty. Thank you so much for that introduction. This presentation will commemorate the enslaved people of Pebble Hill and other Scott properties, and it focuses on Major Harper and Betsy Scott, the patriarch and matriarch of the African American Harper family, and their journey from enslavement to freedom. We'll begin their story with a discussion of their marriage certificate and their ties to the families of half-brothers Judge John J. Harper Jr. and Nathaniel J. Scott. Judge Harper founded the town of Auburn, and Nathaniel J. Scott helped to build the town, having served as a town commissioner. Scott also served in the Alabama State Legislature. The marriage certificate of Major Harper and Betsy Scott marks the time when this emancipated couple legally codified a sacred union that was actually sealed prior to 1865, but was not recognized by the laws of Alabama or the nation. Additionally, the certificate evokes the question, how did Major Harper and Betsy Scott meet? We can never be 100% certain about the circumstances that brought them together due to the lack of personal documents like diaries and letters that might provide the missing details. The best we can do is examine primary sources and information provided by the descendants of Major and Betsy Harper within the historical context of antebellum slavery. We reviewed primary sources and information from descendants and found that the kinship ties between the slaveholding families of Nathaniel J. Scott and Judge Harper likely made it possible for Major and Betsy to meet. Of slavery tells us that Major and Betsy Harper desired to be free and to have full citizenship as Americans, as did other enslaved people. The story of their desire to be recognized as citizens begins with their marriage certificate. Here is displayed the hand-recorded Harper marriage license and certificate as a single document on a page. There are two parts to this record. The first part is probate judge A.B. Fannon's licensure of Major and Betsy to be wed. The second part is Justice of the Peace H.O. Moore's certification that he performed the wedding ceremony. The original license is found in a Macon County, Alabama probate court record book. And this is what you see on your screen is an image of that book. The Harper license appears on a page in the book with the licenses of 3 other African American couples, and it is not a standalone recorded document. In the book, on the page immediately following, there are certificates of 3 other couples. So there are 7 certificates here altogether on these 2 pages. And of the 7, Major and Betsy and 3 other couples all were married on October 21st, 1865. The dates of marriage for the other couples include October 14th, October 15th, and October 22nd. So why did so many marriages take place at one time? The marriage is recorded on pages 259 and 260 of the image on your screen. and numerous others that took place for African American couples in 1865 indicate beliefs held among freed people and the government about marriage. Major and newly emancipated African American couples viewed legal marriage as an act that conferred citizenship status and rights. So, as quickly as they could, Major and Betsy legalized their marriage. Legal marriage conferred legal household status to the Harper family and legal head of household status to Major. With the recognition of the Black household and the Black head of household came Major and Betsy's right to claim and protect their children and to own and distribute property. In 1865, the Harpers and other freed couples eagerly sought to obtain this badge of citizenship that was denied to them for the hundreds of years that slavery operated legally in America. In keeping with the belief that stable family units form the foundation of a civilized American society, the United States government intervened in the matter of legalizing the unions of freed couples through the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency established before the Civil War ended, ostensibly to safeguard the well-being of formerly enslaved people in matters relating to the law, education, and working arrangements with whites. The Bureau's chief issued orders to state officials to facilitate solemnizing and recording marriages of emancipated couples that were united during slavery. And so Bureau officials in other states and Alabama encouraged couples to remarry. The story of Major Harper and Betsy Scott and how they met, married, started a family during slavery is also connected to how the Harper and Scott slaveholding families migrated from Georgia to Alabama. The Harper and Scott slaveholding families both lived in Wilkes, Columbia, and Harris counties in Georgia. And the migration pathways of the two families within Georgia are very similar. And both families eventually migrated to Macon County, Alabama. Macon County was founded in 1832, and the map on your screen is dated 1836. So our arrow ends at Macon County. And at that time, Lee County was not formed, but eventually was formed in 1866 from portions of Macon and the surrounding counties. So based on available probate and will records, we know for certain that Major was enslaved by Judge Harper, but Betsy slaveholder is a little more difficult to trace. Her maiden surname, Scott, however, suggests that the slave owner also had the surname Scott and possibly was Nathaniel J. Scott. The last will and testament found to date that seems to be connected to Betsy is a will that's associated with the family of Nathaniel Scott's wife, Mary Kay Embry. And the will suggests the possibility that the Embry family owned Betsy and or her ancestors. So on your screen, you see an image of the will of John Embry from Columbia County, Georgia, and it's dated June 1826. And item 5, which has a red, which is highlighted with the red box, is the one that pertains to Mary. So John Embry's will stipulated that Mary was to inherit certain enslaved people from the estate. And I'll read the text to you. She was to inherit one Negro man named Sam, one boy named Levi, one Negro girl named Flora, one named Bess, and one Sylvia, and their 5 to her, meaning Mary, and her heirs, meaning Mary's heirs forever. The aforementioned Bess could be Betsy, or Betsy could be one of the 5 unnamed children who belonged to Bess and Sylvia. Naming patterns observed in Mary Kay Embry's family lends credence to this speculation about the enslaved woman Bess. Slaveholders frequently named enslaved people after the relatives in the slaveholding family. Mary K. Embry's mother and maternal grandmother were both named Elizabeth. And if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see the arrow showing that naming pattern. The names Bess and Betsy are nicknames for Elizabeth. This information suggests that the enslaved girl Bess in John Embry's will could be the future Betsy Harper, who was born about 1812. Since Bess had children, and Betsy would have only been about 14 years of age in 1826, it's feasible that Bess was not Betsy, but Betsy's mother. If Bess was Betsy's mother, Bess would have extended the Elizabeth naming traditions by naming her own daughter, Betsy. We can speculate then that Major and Betsy met, united, and started a family during their enslavement due to the kinship ties between the slaveholding Embry, Scott, and Harper families that existed before, during, and after Nathaniel and Mary and Judge Harper all migrated to and settled in Auburn. Apparently, when Mary K. Embry and Nathaniel Scott married in Columbia County, Georgia, Mary brought the enslaved people she inherited into the marriage as jointly held property with Nathaniel. But if Betsy Harper came from the Embry family, why was her maiden surname Scott instead of Embry? An Alabama genealogist, Fraisine Taylor, who specializes in African American family history research, provides an answer. The division of slaves among the children or relatives may account for surnames different than that of an owner, especially if the slaves were willed to a female in the family that might not necessarily have the surname as the deceased. So if we apply this information to our speculations that we've discussed so far, then we know that it was likely that Bess did not inherit, did not take on the surname Embry because she became a part of the household of Nathaniel and Mary Scott. We can speculate again that Major and Betsy married, married, and started a family, looking at the migration patterns that we discussed so far, the naming traditions. And now we're going to move on and talk about Major Harper and his relationship to the documents. So this document on your screen is the first page of an 1849 Orphans Court record that recorded the distribution of the enslaved persons that belonged to the Judge John J. Harper Jr. estate. We can look at this record and see some really key information in terms of not only how many enslaved persons belong to Judge Harper, but going on the family information, the family's information provided by descendants, we know that the persons of interest that are listed in this record are Blacksmith Litt, Mose, Rose, Major, Carpenter Litt, and Nelson. The Harper family descendants have confirmed for us that Carpenter Litt was Major's father, Rose was Major's mother, Blacksmith Litt, Mose, and Nelson were Major's brothers. And the record shows us that naming patterns also existed in African American families too. Major's brother Litt was their father's namesake, and Litt is the short version of the name Littleton. The division of enslaved persons resulted in separation of Major's family members. So, as is shown in this first image, Francis Harper acquired Blacksmith Litt and Mose. On this next page, Wesley F. Harper, who was Judge Harper's son, obtained Rose and Major. William T. Davis, Judge Harper's son-in-law, obtained the elder Litt, Carpenter Litt. And P.O. Harper, another of Judge Harper's sons, and executor of the estate, obtained Nelson. So by looking at the movements of Francis and Wesley Harper, William T. Davis, and P.O. Harper, we can speculate further about the circumstances that made it possible for Major and Betsy to meet. If Major and Betsy were already united as a couple in 1849, then we can speculate about the circumstances that made it possible for them to be in close proximity to each other, remain a couple, and start a family. Sarah Francis, the widow of Judge Harper, and their son Wesley lived in Macon County through 1860. William T. Davis, Judge Harper's son-in-law, also lived in Macon County through 1860. We know through records that P.O. Harper, Judge Harper's other son, lived in Chambers County, Alabama through 1860. The 1850 and 1860 population and slave census records then tell us that Major's immediate family members, who could have included others that were on the list that we just saw, we're just not sure about those relationships, but most certainly Betsy and Major lived in close proximity to each other, despite the separation that this sale or these apportionments of the estate caused, because the people that they went to also lived in close proximity to each other. So with land records and information from the Harper family descendants, we know that the enslaved people that belonged to the Harpers and Scotts moved about somewhat freely between the properties that were owned by the Harpers and Scotts. And this condition certainly contributed to some stability of enslaved family units, including Major and Betsy's family. So overall, there were some fortuitous circumstances that kept this couple together and made it possible for them to exchange marriage vows legally in 1865 to signal their freedom. But antebellum slavery history informs us that Major and Betsy's family stability during enslavement is an exception. By law, enslaved people were chattel, meaning property, and they could be sold. They had economic value, just like any other type of property, and they could be sold for a lot of different reasons, but one, to pay off debt of the slaveholder. So two primary sources make it clear that enslaved people were considered to be property. And the first is this advertisement from 1853. And it's actually an advertisement of an administrator's sale of two enslaved people, Cyrus and Sylvia, and they actually belonged to the estate of Alexander Scott, who was Nathaniel Scott's brother. So this ad appeared after Nathaniel and others who were executors of Alexander Scott's estate obtained permission to hold this sale to pay off the debt against Alexander's estate. One question that this raises is Sylvia in the advertisement the same Sylvia that Mary Kay Embry inherited after her father died? And the answer is probably not, because this Sylvia is too young to be the same person. And records don't tell us, unfortunately, why Cyrus and Sylvia were singled out to be sold. Another primary source that's striking in how it portrays enslaved people as property are the sections that you see on your screen from the 1850 and the 1860 slave census for Nathaniel J. Scott. And the 1850 and the 1860 both list these people only by their age, their gender, whether they were male or female, and the complexion. And for most of them, you'll see a B, and that stands for Black. So in 1850, Nathaniel Scott, the census enumerated a total of 38 individuals belonging to him. And in 1860, the number went up to 63. Well, in 1853, Nathaniel acquired 3 enslaved persons from the estate of his brother Alexander. Their names were John, Elsie, and Mary. And so this in part explains the reason for the increase in the number of slaves that Scott owned from 1850 to 1860. One of the reasons for the difficulty in confirming that Betsy Scott was owned by Nathaniel J. Scott is the seeming non-existence of documents that describe the probation and settlement of his estate. In the antebellum era, as we have seen, estate probation and settlement documents, like the Orphans Court records for Judge Harper, typically provided a listing of enslaved people by their first name, gender, their value stated in dollars, and sometimes the identities of the persons who purchased or inherited them. Nathaniel Scott died in 1863. He wrote a will, and his widow Mary petitioned for a date to enter the will into probate, but the paper trail runs cold after that. Related primary sources reveal that the settlement of the estate of Nathaniel Scott was complicated by debt against the estate. This suggests that if Nathaniel owned Betsy, the estate's executors could have sold her away from Major and their 9 children that they had by this time. Conditions existed for the entire family to be sold, each to buyers who were not kin to the slaveholding Scott and Harper families, who did not live in close proximity to Macon County or adjacent counties. And indeed, countless numbers of enslaved families lost track of each other forever due to this permanent separation caused by slave sales to satisfy debt. But the Civil War was 2 years along in 1863 when Nathaniel Scott died, and perhaps contributed to delays in settling his estate, including selling off slaves to pay his debts. Nevertheless, when Mary K. Scott finally sold Pebble Hill in 1870, she no longer had slave chattel to sell to raise money to pay debt. By that time, Major and Betsy were at least 5 years into their status as free people, and the threat of permanent separation to satisfy debt by selling them no longer existed. And on your screen, you can see the advertisement that appeared in the newspaper in 1870 for a mortgage sale of Pebble Hill by auction in Montgomery, Alabama. And the fact that it was being sold by auction also suggests that this was a stressful sort of situation for Mary selling this property. Between 1865 and 1870, there's another monumental event that occurred for Major Harper that also signaled his citizenship. In 1867, he, like countless other newly freed Black men, registered to vote for the very first time. What you see on your screen is the actual image, the image of the actual voter registration. And since the Major's name on the complete document is too small, there's an enlarged image, and you can faintly see Major Harper on line 448. Emancipated Black men obtained this right to register when Congress passed an act requiring all male citizens over the age of 21 years that were qualified to vote to be registered. Black men actually gained the constitutional right to vote in 1870 with the adoption of the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution. Betsy, however, never obtained voting rights. Major and Betsy's female descendants and Betsy legally, well, Betsy never obtained it, but her descendants obtained the right to vote when the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified in 1920. And of course, we know that the suppression of Black men's and women's voting rights occurred at least up until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1964 and 1965. So when legislators in 1870 adopted the 15th Amendment, a U.S. federal census enumerator for Lee County, Alabama, which was established by that time, counted Major and Betsy Scott along with their 3 children who were still living at home. by name for the very first time. Their listing by name as a family on the 1870 census confirms that Major and Betsy Harper endured and survived the harsh and dehumanizing conditions of enslavement to obtain recognition of their freedom and status as American citizens in the eyes of the law. And they built a life and legacy for themselves, their children, and their descendants. This presentation shows through primary sources, kinship ties, migration patterns, Major and Betsy Harper's family history, the writings of historians about antebellum slavery, and family naming patterns that we can know and understand better the story of Major and Betsy Harper and their connections to Pebble Hill. On your screen, you'll see Major and Betsy and their 9 children and dates of birth and death as we currently know them. Their family legacy includes a continuation of naming traditions through generations, with the names Littleton, Major, Betsy, and nicknames for Betsy being quite popular. Major and Betsy's legacy is also represented by the fact that descendants still reside in Auburn today. Auburn family members and other members of this close-knit family celebrate their ties to Pebble Hill through collaborative projects with the Caroline Marshall Draughon Center for the Arts and Humanities, and through sharing discoveries made through their ongoing Scott-Harper family research. Thank you.
Thank you, Shari. You illustrate well the detective work and the documents and the critical questions that keep genealogists and historians awake deep into the night, and we are so appreciative. And now I would like to call on Dr. Terrance Vickerstaff. Dr. Vickerstaff lives and works in Huntsville, but his roots are right here in Auburn. He is a descendant of Major Harper, Betsy Scott, and serves as the family genealogist and historian. Terrance, we welcome your response.
Good evening. The response that I have is one of elatement and excitement. I am a descendant of Major and Betsy Scott Harper. And as a family, on behalf of my family, I would like to thank Auburn University and the Caroline Marshall Draughon Center for the Arts and Humanities at Pebble Hill. Pebble Hill, the place that my family helped build. Pebble Hill, the place that we called home. Pebble Hill that represents so many memories and so many stories about my family's enslavement and our freedom. Dr. Mark Wilson and staff, thank you for becoming a part of our family and allowing us to walk with you and you walk with us. And to our researcher and detective, PhD candidate and researcher, Shari Williams, thank you for allowing my family's story to come alive in this medium by way of walking the steps, walking the life, and understanding the need for documentation and being willing to do the detective work on Major and Betsy Scott Harper. We thank you for joining us on our family's journey from enslavement to freedom. This story is embedded in who I am. My Harper and Scott and Zeller's identity comes by way of this family. And this is my story, this is my family's story, but this is the story of many that were enslaved not only on the Harper and the Scott plantations in Auburn, Alabama, but throughout the Auburn community. Those families that came over in 1836 with the settlers and cleared the dense wilderness of then Macon County and built what we know to exist as Auburn University and Auburn, Alabama. This is our past, this is our present, but this is also the possibilities of our future. It's a story, it's a narrative, and it's a narrative that we count 9 generations, from that of my Papa Littleton's birth before 1790 to the last baby Cameron born back in January. And this is a snippet of who we are. This is a snippet of an enslaved community, but this is a snippet of our freedom and our future, of what we could become because of what was in us: strength, resilience, fortitude, faith, but most of all, love. This is my family story, and I thank you for joining us as we have learned more today about who Major and Betsy Scott Harper were as enslaved persons, but persons who lived through freedom to be able to see generations of their own children become pillars in the Auburn community. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrance. So well stated. And we hope that we do have friends of Pebble Hill and family descendants with us right now. And we would love to have questions from you in the comments section on Facebook. Shari and Terrance will be online now, and they will answer those questions in the comments section. But for now, as we end, Shari and Terrance, thank you for discovering, interpreting, and making available this important history. We hope everyone will follow us on Facebook for future programs like this one. Thanks.